Hey everybody, it's me just making a new video today. This is my Wrestling Forgotten Gems number 10. Now I know I haven't been putting these Wrestling Forgotten Gems videos, but I thought I'd put one out today since the last couple videos have been wrestling and talking about other stuff. And then tomorrow, if I do decide to make a video, it's going to be talking about the top 5 surprising NFL teams in the 2000 my top 5 surprising NFL teams in the 2009 NFL season. I'll give you my thoughts of that and why they're going to be the most surprising teams in the NFL in 2009. But let's get to this video. The Wrestling Forgotten Gems, usually it's a video where I talk about some of the most classic things that happen in either WCW, ECW, or the WWF, or the WWE, well, WWF around the 1990s or the 1980s, and I usually talk about the stuff that many people tend to forget, like wrestling titles, which my last couple Wrestling Forgotten Gems videos have been about wrestling titles, or feuds that many people tend to forget because they talk about the big time feuds that were going on that really some weren't good to begin with and some were good that they overshadowed the most forgotten feuds, or usually the stables or factions in wrestling. And that this is no different, as this is going to be me talking about the U.S. title, a title that right now really doesn't mean anything because it's lost its prestige. Yeah, you got MVP holding the belt, but it really doesn't mean anything now. It did mean something when it was on SmackDown, but now that it's on Raw, kind of doesn't mean anything because really no one really cares about Raw. And now the IC title is back where it needs to be, where it's important and it's being more focused on, and people are talking about the titles. But around the time WCW was still going on, around the 70s and the 80s, this was really the belt everybody was really fighting for. I mean, this was like the second belt only behind the World Heavyweight, the WCW World Heavyweight title, of course, because everybody was going after that belt. But the U.S. title was really a belt that helped make stars and elevate stars, and it helped elevate feuds, and it made a lot of stars, as stars who would go on to, like I said in the TV title, stars that went on to fight for the TV title went on to fight for the World Heavyweight title. This was no different. As you would know about the IC title, the WWF IC title, the wrestlers who were in that IC title picture or wore the IC title went on to become stars and went on to move into the WWF title. Well, that was the same thing with the WCW U.S. title, as guys who won the belt or were competing in the belt or feuded with the belt went on to go on to bigger things and went on to go win the WCW World Heavyweight title. Just look at some of the notable names who won this belt. I mean, you had Harley Race, you had Johnny Valentine, you had Terry Funk, you had Paul Jones, you had Blackjack Mulligan, you had Bobo Brazil, you had Ric Flair, you had Mr. Wrestling, you had Ricky Steamboat, you had Jimmy Snuka, Greg Valentine, you had Rowdy Piper, you had Wahoo McDaniels, you had Sergeant Slaughter before he went to the WWF, you had Dick Slater, you had Magnum TA, you had Tully Blanchard, you had Nikita Koloff, you had Lex Luger, you had Dusty Rhodes, you had Barry Windham, you had Michael Hayes, you had Stan Hansen, you had Sting, Rick Rude, you had Dustin Rhodes, Steve Austin, Jim Duggan, Vader, Kinzaki Sasan. You had One Man Gang, Conan, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Jeff Jarrett, Steve McMichael, Kurt Hennig, DDP, Raven, and the list just goes on. I mean, this belt had so many good wrestlers so many notable, well-known wrestlers hold the belt, and they went on to bigger things, and that's what this belt did. Not only did this belt have some big-name superstars hold it to go on to win WCW titles, this belt also helped establish feuds, and it helped set the tone for feuds in WCW. Like, the most notable feud that I can remember is Lex Luger and Barry Windham going at it. Those two feuded over the belt with Lex Luger leaving the Horsemen, and then of course him and Barry Windham feuding with each other because the Horsemen were out to try to take out Luger for turning on them. Another feud that I remember, that I might be young, but I still saw it on one of the Steel Cage DVDs, was Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard. This was a real intense feud. It was good. You had Magnum TA, who was the U.S. champion, and you had Tully Blanchard, who cheated his way to beat Magnum TA, and these two just hated each other. I mean, they would attack each other. You would have Tully Blanchard send one of his women to do the dirty work, and then Tully Blanchard would attack him from behind. Just an awesome feud over the U.S. title. Another feud that I remember is Sting and Rick Rude. These two feuded so many times over the U.S. title, although they would feud over the WCW International World Heavyweight title. But the most notable feud that I remember them feuding over was the WCW U.S. title, with Sting and Rick Rude just feuding with each other, and it ended with Rick Rude finally being able to beat Sting and take the belt away from Sting. Then Rick Rude feuding with Dustin Rhodes. That was a good feud, which led to Dustin Rhodes winning his first major title. The other most notable feud was Steve Austin and Ricky Steamboat. I mean, this was a really awesome feud, as this was the feud that helped elevate Austin and had people in WCW talking about him being a star in the making. But apparently, unfortunately, the powers that be in WCW didn't see that way, and thus Austin ended up getting fired. But that feud was an awesome feud, as Ricky Steamboat went out of his way to make Steve Austin look like $1 million in that feud. You also had Vader. I mean, you also had Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko feud over that belt, which was awesome, and it led to Dean Malenko taking the belt away from Eddie Guerrero. You had Jeff Jarrett and Steven Michael feud over the belt, with them feuding because Jeff Jarrett wanted to be a part of the Horsemen, and Steven Michael didn't want Jarrett in the Horsemen, as he felt Jeff Jarrett would be a traitor and he would turn on the Horsemen. And that analogy would prove to be right when they had Kurt Hennig join the Horsemen and he turned on them. You had the DDP Kurt Hennig feud, which led to a really good matchup between the two at WCW Starrcade 1997, where Kurt Hennig put DDP over real big. You had Goldberg and you had DDP and Raven feud over the belt, which led to Raven taking the belt from DDP, and it led to Goldberg being the one to take the belt from Raven. You had Bret Hart and DDP feud over it, with Bret Hart wanting to injure DDP and get rid of him. You had the David Flair against everybody storyline. You had the Chris Benoit and Jeff Jarrett storyline, the Lance Storm storyline, and you just had so many good storylines. And General Reaction and Lance Storm and Booker T and Scott Steiner. You just had so many good storylines with this belt, and it helped elevate the belt with all these, with all the feuds. I meant to say, with all the feuds, it helped elevate the belt. You also had some bad champions hold the belt. I mean, these were guys that really shouldn't have. They had no business holding on to the belt. Whether it was Jim Duggan, Rick Steiner, Scott Hall when he was all wasted up, David Flair, of all people, One Man Gang, and guys like General Reaction, and just guys like that really had no business holding the belt. But WCW thought it'd be a good move to have these guys hold the belt. And then of course you had the big name stars who went on to hold the belt. But yeah, this is a belt that really people tend to forget when it comes to remembering WCW, because they remember the WCW World Heavyweight title when it was prestigious before it lost its credibility, and they tend to forget about the U.S. title and they forget about the feuds and stuff like that. But people need to remember this belt for the belt elevating stars and making new stars and making feuds and help elevating feuds and just stuff like that. And that's what people need to remember, and that's one of the reasons why I have this on my Wrestling Forgotten Gems. Anyhow, that's my video. Hope you like my video. Rate, comment, and hope to see you next video tomorrow. Hopefully the picture comes in. Until then, thank you for